Got it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for having me today. As I told Sari and Berta and Ili, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Ili. As I told them earlier, I'm one of those fortunate people that their research makes them happy, and I don't think it is coincidental that I'm working on happiness. It's just something about the area that influences your overall life and how you handle your research and the troubles that come with it. So I'm very fortunate to share our research with you so far. I want to say from the beginning that the Gross National Happiness Today project is a collaboration project between myself and my partner in crime, Talita Greiling from the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. And we started this together in 2019. So where's just my name's there because I'm doing a presentation, this is very much teamwork. All right, I'm just going to minimize this. Yeah. So Sherlock Holmes is one of my favorite people in the whole world. And I always like to start with a quote from him. And he said, "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts." Now, what is so amazing about big data? And for those of you that don't really know what big data is, it's classified by the 4 V's, so volume, velocity, variety, and veracity. And what makes it so great to work with data is we have more data than we've ever had before. And it allows us as researchers now to reconsider what we think we already have learned from existing theories. So we can redo everything that has been done, but now with real data and big data, real-time big data. Big data also allows us to now have a fundamental grasp on people's attitudes, their beliefs, and their experiences. And what we can do is once we know how people's attitudes or beliefs changes with a specific policy or an event, we can then give advice to policymakers on when you encounter the next similar event to help alleviate any pressure that comes from being unhappy, which has far-reaching consequences. So quickly to run through the benefits of big data. Like I said, much larger and more detailed data sets at a lower cost when you compare it to survey data. It provides a more comprehensive view of a given population or phenomenon than survey data could. It provides us more accurate data, primarily because it doesn't suffer from the same errors or biases that survey data can have. And it can identify patterns and correlations that wasn't immediately apparent or that we just missed the first time going through an exercise. Now, when we talk about the benefits of social media, the number one benefit is timeliness. If you look at survey data, the results are always, it comes with a time lag, usually a year, quarterly, or whatever the case might be, but there's a significant time lag between when the survey data was done and when you get the actual information. Now, we live in an ever-changing world, so we need as up-to-date information as soon as possible, and this is something that you get from social media data. It also, and I think it was Eli that said that survey data have got predefined questions that people have to respond to, but using social media allows us to listen to the citizens, listen to what their needs or their concerns are in terms of their well-being. It also allows them to reveal their preferences behavior. It's got a zero non-response bias. And because we use social media, we get to work with such a vast blend of users. We get individuals, companies, institutions, government institutions, private institutions. So we get this entire mood that we have for a vast blend of our users. Of course, nothing comes without limitations. So the first thing, although it does represent a significant proportion of the population, your social media data is not representative. But I do not see that as a problem. For one of the papers that we did on the Ukraine war and lockdown, we worked with over 900 million tweets. So even though it's not representative, and I think Sari said somebody from psychology is here. They can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot that we know from psychology comes from American college students, which is definitely not representative, but they have made some significant contributions to overall life just by using that data. It's difficult to establish convergent validity, plain and simple, because there's not a lot of, for example, survey data that we can use to compare to outcomes. But as I'll show you later, we tried our best. Then there can be a drift in usage when you work with Twitter data. There is the possibility that people can post in a socially desirable fashion, so that can lead to endogeneity problems. And of course, there are ethical concerns, because when a person tweets or writes a post update on Facebook or on Instagram, they do not consent for researchers to use that data in any study. And then, of course, there is the instability of platforms. We all know that when Elon Musk took over the then Twitter, the now X, he made significant changes. Prior to him taking over the company, we academics had free access to the amount of Twitter data that we can download that we could use. He revoked those licenses. And I told the ladies previously that we now, if we extract about 1 million or did 1 million tweets per month, and that would cost us approximately $43,000 US a month. And this is a non-for-profit. For AUT, they have to fund this whole thing every year, and there's no way they can afford $43,000 US per month. So there is the problem of instability of platforms, which has repercussions for when statistical officers adopt your measures. Just a quick background on the past research that either looked at Facebook, Google Trends, or Twitter in what they did. So the first person or the team is Dodson Danford, and they started actually in 2008. They started with the odometer, which also is, the last time I checked, also standing still because they used Twitter. The difference between their hedometer and our gross national happiness.today happiness project is that they use a bag of words. So they only look at the word and assign a happiness score per word. From memory, the word that scored the highest happiness score was the word happy. And the word that scored the lowest in terms of happiness was terrorist. So they scored, I think they have over 10,000 words that they use, and they score every day. They calculate how many times a word has been used, and they get an average score per day using their bag of words approach. ISQOLS, a very good friend of ours, works for statistical office now. He's at Boston University currently. He's a statistician. He's very, very good at what he does, but he decided to venture into well-being. And he also used Twitter to create a composite index of social well-being for Italy and Japan. It's also now gone. Olgon in 2016, he used Google Trends, and he created a subjective well-being index by using search terms that related to subjective well-being. Swartz used Facebook, and he created predictive models for satisfaction with life. And then the one that's the most important out of all of these is ours. So Talita and my gross national happiness.today project, which we started in 2019. So if you went to our website, you would see that there is a graph, time series graph, that showed you how happiness changed hourly according to the countries that you selected. And what I'm just quickly going to do to you is explain what we do, how we do that, how did we go about validating our time series data, and then we'll get to the real important stuff, which is the application of the happiness data. So we use big data to extract in real time, high frequency, hourly or daily time series data. And we call it happiness because I'll tell you now about it. We call it happiness. And we have had philosophical discussions with some of the world's best philosophers about what it is that we're actually measuring. Is it affect happiness? Is it immediate and it's gone? So is it your affect happiness, or is it something more? And we decided it is a combination of the two. You see something, you react to it, but there's a pause before you actually tweet something. You consider what it is that you're tweeting. So there is why did that change? There is this element of reflection. So we call it the happiness. And if you looked at the graph of New Zealand, I call it the heartbeat of a nation, because it goes up and you can see how different events increased or decreased the mood of the nation on our time series data. So it started in 2019 with South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, but we since have broadened it out to include 7 European countries: Belgium, Germany, Great Britain, France, Italy, Netherlands, and Spain. So later on in our studies, when I say we worked with all 10 countries, those are the countries from the Northern and the Southern Hemisphere that we included in our studies. So we used tweets, we extracted in real time. And like I said previously, we extracted about 1 million tweets per day. And all of these tweets, we start with a bounding box that we place on each country. And then we extract within that bounding box, we extract all the geolocated tagged tweets. Now we do that for, number one, to minimize the impacts that bots will have. If it's a bot that's responsible for the tweet, it will not have a geotag. And then the second thing, as we extract the tweets in real time, we do not extract retweets. We only extract the original tweets, and that also minimizes the impact that bots could potentially have on our data. Now, after we extract the tweets in real time per country using our bounding box, we determine the languages. Up until the last time we worked with the Ukrainian war versus the lockdown, we knew that there were 64 languages that we worked with. If we didn't have the lexicon that we use in the original language, we translate it into English. Now, once a tweet is translated from the original language into English, it gets popped back into the sequence of the tweet, so it's back in its original space. And then we conduct sentiment and emotion analysis on the tweet. To conduct the sentiment analysis, we use the lexicon Sentiment 140, SAYUZ, VIDER, and TextBlob. And to conduct the emotion analysis of the tweets, we use NRC, that's National Research Council. And we extract 8 emotions, and I always forget one. It's the Plutchik wheel of emotions: anger, sadness, fear, disgust, surprise, trust, joy. Always one, anticipation. So extract those 8 emotions from the tweets. So once we have extracted the sentiment is positive, negative, or neutral. Once we extracted the sentiment for every tweet and the emotion scored for every tweet, we calculate our GNH index. After we have the score from the sentiment and emotion analysis, we run a sentiments balancing algorithm. And once that is done, that allows us to generate our happiness score from 0 to 10, with 5 being neutral, 10 very happy, 0 being very unhappy. And then to derive our time series from 2019 forward, we calculate the mean happiness per hour per day. So in terms of internal validity, we tried everything that we can think of to ensure that our data is valid. As I mentioned before, to make sure that the sentiment that we get from the tweets, which is different than bag of words focuses on a specific word, whereas sentiment analysis takes the context of the entire tweet into consideration. We only started with sentiment 140, but after sentiment 140, we added VIDER, which is better, and we do TextBlob, and we do SAYUZ. So we use different lexicons in natural language processing to make sure that we get a robust measure of our happiness scores. What we did also is we looked at the time scale invariance, because we collate our data hourly, so our sampling period is per hour. We also collected in a 6-hour window, and we also collected tweets on a daily basis to see whether the time scale changes our data. And as you can see on the slide in front of you, the time scale at which sampling takes place doesn't influence the information that we obtained. We also looked at volume invariance, because our index takes geotag tweets from the bounding box. We wanted to see if the volume of tweets makes a difference to our happiness score. So we tested our volume with 5,000 tweets, 10,000, 20, and 30,000 tweets from the data every day. And as you can see, our measure is robust against our sampling. External validity, we did this as a part for the paper we conducted with the statistical offices, Statistiek in Luxembourg, in which we included. Luxembourg is not currently a country that we collect data from. It doesn't tweet enough, but it was included in the study as well, on top of our original 10 countries that we used. And what we did is we took those countries that had an average life satisfaction according to the Eurobarometer, and we correlated that with the GNH that we had. You can see, except for Italy, which is a complete outlier, it seems that there is a positive correlation between our happiness score and the Eurobarometer. We also took into consideration the confidence, the consumer confidence, and we used data that we got from the European Commission. And we did a correlation between the happiness score and then the consumer confidence data. And as you can see, there seems to be a meaningful relationship between the two. The last thing we did is we constructed an index of negative emotions. So we used fear, sadness, and anger, and we used Google Trends to look for search terms. And then we correlated the index of negative emotions to our happiness score. And as you can see on the screen, the correlation is negative and statistically significant between our happiness index and the index of negative emotions. But this is where everything ends up. So we had to go through all of that so we could actually start doing research. And it truly is about the application. Now, before we had this real-time measure of happiness, hourly real-time measure of happiness, we couldn't do the research that we're currently doing. We couldn't see the patterns. We couldn't answer questions that couldn't be answered before. That I say couldn't answer. We couldn't answer questions that was unanswerable before. And it's amazing. When COVID hit in 2020, Talita and I were the only people that had real-time data on happiness starting from 2019. So we could see in real time, up to the hour after the announcements of lockdowns were made, we could see the impact of that on happiness. And that is why we published so many papers since 2021. The first paper that we did with Phil Morrison from Victoria University, that one considered COVID, so the COVID-19 pandemic and how that impacted happiness. But the rest of those studies that you see under the real-time effect of global pandemic and government intervention primarily looked at lockdown. And through all of those studies, time and time again, we proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that lockdown and the announcement of lockdown had a significant negative effect on happiness. And we could do further econometric modeling using different methods and estimations to decipher why, or come up with the factors of why it was happening. It also allowed us, for the first time ever, to create a vaccine positive attitude index, which I'll explain later. And we could track people's attitude towards receiving the COVID-19 vaccine in real time. And then we could use narrative analysis and topic modeling to understand what is driving the feelings towards vaccine hesitancy. The paper that we just finished is where we used machine learning, not that it's relevant, but we used XGBoost to predict what are the most important factors if you want to reach a specific vaccination threshold. Could never do that before we had big data. And then lastly, what we also now just finished is the comparison. Never before could we compare two different kinds of shocks. You had the Russia-Ukraine war, which is an exogenous macro level shock to our countries and our sample because nobody is directly involved in the war. And then you had lockdown, which is an endogenous shock that impacted our countries. So not only could we see the difference between two different kinds of shock, a war shock and a lockdown shock, so a government regulation shock, we could also compare what happens in terms of happiness and what happens in terms of emotions. So never before did we know, do they elicit the same response on happiness? Do they elicit the same change in collective emotions? We didn't know, but now we know. And the more we know, the better we can equip policymakers going forward. Sorry, I can't see you, but you will have to give me a 5-minute warning, please, or else I might just keep on talking until 4 o'clock.
Yeah, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Stephanie.
Don't worry if you go over another 5.
Okay. So this was the study, and we did different studies. We did 2 different studies just focusing on South Africa. We did a study just focusing on New Zealand, and we did a study where we did the cross-country analysis in terms of the effect of lockdown announcement. And as you can see, there's no doubt the biggest dip that you see in that, I should have put on the other graph, but that dip that you see in happiness is due because of the lockdown announcement. Almost to the hour, you can track that effect that it had on happiness. And it's because of that anticipation effect that you see, and you're anticipating what it's going to be like, and therefore the announcement affects it more. In terms of what we found in New Zealand, what we did is we defined different happiness states for New Zealand. So how do they move from an unhappy to a happy state after the lockdown? And what we saw for New Zealand is that the negative things that negatively affected our happiness was the lack of mobility. So the lockdown didn't work for us. We didn't like being locked down. The fact that we couldn't cross borders, mobility negatively affected our ability to go from an unhappy to a happy state. And the things that were positively associated with our probability to become happy was our international travel. People, New Zealand loved to travel, so they had to do something about the fact that we couldn't travel, open up borders. And it was also the job seeker support was a big positive influence in our probability to become happy again. For South Africa, the thing that we saw there, South Africa had the strictest lockdown from all 3 of these countries. They went as far as banning the sale of alcohol and cigarettes, which I think is, okay, you don't want people to drink and to smoke, but doing that during the first global pandemic in recent history and locking people down in their homes, I don't think that is a very good idea, and it created a stressful situation, which it was unattainable. Interestingly enough, though we found that in New Zealand, the actual stay-at-home was negatively associated with our happiness, in South Africa, it was the other way around, that we found that the stay-at-home orders was actually positively associated with an increase in happiness in South Africa. And if you don't understand South Africa, it's one of the highest crime countries in the world. And there was more safety when everybody had to stay home. People felt more safe that the criminals will not be roaming the streets. In terms of our vaccine hesitancy, so we created our vaccine positive attitude index. So what we did is we collected over 900 million tweets up to that stage, and we selected tweets based on keywords. That was the beauty of working with Twitter. You can extract tweets just based on keywords, which we did for this one. So we extracted it based on keywords related to COVID-19 vaccine or vaccine in general, all of the vaccines names that was available. And you can also go and extract tweets just focusing on government. And then you can go and determine the sentiment and the emotion of both. And after we created this vaccine positive attitude index, we could see from February 2021, and this is all 10 countries, from February 2021 to August, we could see a systematic decrease in the positive attitude towards the vaccine. So there was more reluctance at the end of it to actually accept the vaccine. This held across the northern and the southern hemisphere, and it held in New Zealand. And what's so fascinating from this is that we could use our topic modeling and narrative analysis to pull out of the tweets what it is from the New Zealand side, all the countries, but you'll only be interested really from New Zealand side, what affected that positive attitude? Why were we so reluctant to accept this vaccine as time went on? And the primary thing that we learned from that data is if the government mucks up the rollout process, you immediately create distrust in the government. If the government mucks up the vaccine rollout and it does not have enough vaccines to vaccinate all of the vulnerable populations by the time they say they would, trust is gone. And as soon as trust is gone, then it gives that foothold for misinformation to start spreading. And unfortunately, we saw this have an ever bigger negative effect on our minority groups and our most vulnerable of the committee, which should have been vaccinated first, but that didn't happen, which we didn't know these things before, which is why I love this. The one that we just finished, so we were the first study to run our machine learning models. And we started with 69 different variables. And what the XGBoost model does is it doesn't tell you the relationship between the variables and predicting a specific vaccination threshold. So if you can remember back to when we started the vaccine rollout, it was first 70% had to be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. Then as the new strains come, that threshold was moved up to 90% to achieve herd immunity. So we had this opportunity to look reflectively, retrospectively back over the COVID period. So we worked from December 2020 until September 2022 to see, let this model predict which are the most important factors that you should focus on if you want to achieve a specific vaccination threshold. And vaccination policy comes out, number one, which means everybody should have access to the vaccine as soon as possible. International travel controls, don't lock people down and make them not travel. If you let people still fly and travel, they will be more inclined to have the vaccine. But the important thing is we were the first to include measures of subjective well-being. So in this one, we used our GNH, our happiness. And the fascinating thing is you can see that as your vaccination threshold increases from 70 to 80 to 90%, the importance of happiness increases from 9th to, 6th, 7th to number 4, which just shows you how important happiness is, the role that it plays if you want to achieve a vaccination threshold. Okay, Russia and Ukraine. So we compared, like I said previously, the endogenous shock lockdown with the exogenous shock, the Russia-Ukraine war. And as you can see, that's my left-hand side. That is the happiness before and after lockdown. And on the right-hand side, it is the invasion. So happiness before and after the invasion of Ukraine. And what we could see, doesn't matter what kind of shock it is, they both have a significant decrease in happiness. What else did I want to say? Oh, what we did with this study is we tested adaptation theory, because basically adaptation theory will tell you how quickly you adapt to your previous levels of happiness, which was done previously with micro-level data, widowhood, unemployment, things like that. But what we did is we tested how quickly people adapted to the pre-shock happiness levels. And we saw that in lockdown, 2 weeks after lockdown, people's happiness levels adapted. But when it came to the invasion shock, it took a week longer. So it was only after 3 weeks with the invasion of Ukraine that our happiness levels adapted. We also saw that when it comes to the magnitude of the effect of the shock on happiness. Lockdown had the biggest effect on happiness, had the bigger effect on happiness than did the invasion. Now, the adaptation period of 2 and 3 weeks, respectively, was very interesting. But we could detect from the tweets that there is a double effect that came with the invasion. First, we were affected negatively by feeling sympathy and sorrow for the people in Ukraine that's actually going through it. And as time started to pass, we realized the economic effects of that. So the higher fuel prices, inflation, there was already talk about what this is going to do to your economy, recession. So we had that dual impact, and therefore happiness took longer to adapt. And I think this is the last one. Then we looked at collective emotions. And we wanted to see what was the change in the sequence of negative emotions of 2 different kinds of shocks. Again, endogenous lockdown and exogenous invasion, which we didn't know before. And we could see in real time what the sequence of change in emotions were. I don't have a pointer, but if you can follow me, so day 0 on your horizontal axis, the 0 in the middle is when the shocks occurred. And then we have, of course, pre and post. And we had a counterfactual. So for 2020 lockdown and invasion 2022, we used the exact same dates, but in a counterfactual year. And I think we used 2021 as the counterfactual, because if you use a counterfactual, it must represent the actuality of the years more, and 2021 reflects the actuality of 2020 and 2022 more than 2019, because there was no COVID-19 in 2019. And what we found is one emotion is common pre, and that was fear. And we could go and do narrative analysis and topic modeling on what drove the fear pre-lockdown versus pre-invasion. And it's what you could think. Pre-lockdown, there was a lot of fear for frontline staff not being vaccinated. Coincidentally, the disgust that is higher pre-lockdown was driven by the excessive toilet paper buying, and the fear that the elderly individuals will not have sufficient resources to get them through lockdown. The invasion fear, you can think what that was, World War III, what's going to happen to the Ukrainian people. And then we saw that the first emotion to react after lockdown, regardless, and invasion, so regardless of the macro level shock, was anger. And first anger reacts, and then it is sadness, and then it is fear, which we didn't know beforehand. We also saw that anger was the emotion that the magnitude of change was the most from trough to peak. We could see from narrative, I know I'm out of time, but we could have seen, we did see from our narrative and topic modeling what drove the increase in anger, fear, and sadness after. And this is not on here, but we also we looked at joy. And the great news from looking at joy is we saw that joy does not completely go away during times of stress and shock, which leads us to state that joy can mitigate these negative collective emotions that we feel in a society. Quickly on the future research. So Twitter is gone. So what we are doing now, I've put in I'm busy on the Marsden application. We already started it with Facebook, just Facebook. But what we are doing is we know that the Sustainable Development Goals can be measured in real time. So we don't just have to wait for government data or administrative data that comes with significant lags. We can have proxies in real time to measure and track the progress of countries towards meeting those goals. For example, I just have 2 there. You could look at spending patterns on mobile phone services, and that could be seen as a proxy indicator of income levels. And for zero hunger, you could use crowdsourcing or tracking of food price listed online that can help monitor food security in near real time. So what we are doing is we are taking these Sustainable Development Goals and what they actually represent, and we are combining that with the OECD's Better Life Index. And the OECD Better Life Index got multidimensional domains that consist out of well-being, and they also have life satisfaction. So we're combining the idea of sustainable development together with our well-being domains. And we are currently planning, we're in the planning stage, and we hope to get the funding, because this will cost some money, for all of the dimensions that we have from this, that the OECD Better Life Index that sits within the sustainable development goals. We will have both an objective and a subjective measure that will be, we will use Facebook, Google Trends, and Instagram, and we will create that real-time measure that incorporates sustainability, inclusivity, and we will display that live on a dashboard that we will create so that anybody can go and see how countries are tracking towards meeting the goals in terms of sustainability and well-being across time. And it will help us to give better feedback to policymakers if we find that they deviate from it. So far we're calling it the Inclusive Sustainable Wellbeing Index. And that's it. Thank you.